Hello and welcome to DDOCast episode 478, recorded live on Sunday, June 25th. I'm your host, Patrick. With me this week, we have returning from the Lava Divers on Kyber, Benton. Hello, Benton.
Hello.
Hello. We also have Arkat from the Guildless Guild on Kyber.
Happy summer, everybody.
Yay, summer. Let's see. Our screenshot of the week is Delta Bravo taking a break after getting all 30 racial past lives in the 321st screenshot of the week. Well done. That's a lot of past lives in what that's been out for not that long, right?
No, if you had asked me if that was possible to have them by now, I would have said no, but evidently this guy's very dedicated.
It's an impressive
Or
streak.
used a lot of stones.
Yeah, that too. But well done. A tip of the hat, sir. That is still quite the accomplishment. Let's see. We like to talk about Dungeons & Dragons online nearly every weekend. You can watch us through Twitch, YouTube, the DDO forums, iTunes, or from our website at DDOcast.com. DDOcast is hosted by Cyber Ears, the awesome podcast hosting network. Shows are usually available within a few days of recording. The next show will probably be next weekend, probably. And you can stay updated by following us on our social media pages or our website, DDOcast.com, on their calendar. On the podcast this week, we're going to talk about a little bit of news. We've got an idea of what Update 36 is going to include. But we're going to also continue our discussion about Reaper mode. What we're going to focus on today is building for Reaper mode. Last week we were kind of talking about tactics. This week we're going to really focus in on how to build for playing in Reaper mode. There's a couple things that you're going to want to consider when you're building for Reaper mode. There's a few things that are structurally they're a little bit different that we kind of want to talk about. So. Let's talk about building for Reaper mode. So let's start big picture, and maybe we'll start with Benton here. Big picture, what's a build, or what kind of a build philosophy should players be using as they're preparing to play in Reaper mode?
I think that's a good question. I think it also ties out to tactics, though, so I apologize if I rehash anything. But really, Reaper mode is more about the team play, really, especially as you get into higher skills or higher skulls. And so you have to make sure that your tune is well-rounded enough to help out with healing and other things. So UMD is key. I always cringe when I get into a group and there's somebody that can't res, especially at the higher levels in Reaper mode. Make sure you can help support your party with heals. Make sure you can help support your party with UMD and resing. So really, aside from the obvious, you're going to take more damage and do less damage. So try to max those things out. But really, I think it's more about making sure your team can help support the rest of the party in addition to its main job or your player.
Sure. Arkat, what about you? What do you think, big picture, people want to think about as they're preparing to play in Reaper mode? Don't forget to push to talk. Uh-oh, we might have lost Arkat. That's unfortunate. So I'll do my portion. So what do I think? Big picture. You want to build for survivability more so than just offense. You need you've always kind of wanted to have a good balance, but things are going to hit considerably harder in Reaper mode. So you need to make sure that you're prepared to deal with some of that. And also things like you're going to run into more champions, so you're going to have to account for champion effects like dots and elemental damage and stuff like that. But really it's lean more on the survivability side, not getting hit, having more hit points, more PRR, that kind of stuff. Because we've said this a lot on the show before. Your DPS approaches 0 very quickly as you die. So your ability to help the party when you're dead is almost negligible. So,
I think that's a great point. Stay alive.
Sorry about that, Patrick. I had something pop up in my window and I couldn't talk
that's okay.
while that was up.
So, what are your big picture thoughts, Arkat?
I think you basically just said it. Survivability is more important than DPS. Glass cannons need not apply. You gotta, like you said, it's better to be alive and then sort of, contribute DPS-wise than be dead and not contribute at all. So that's a thing you need to really consider is your defenses and things like hit points and being able to stay alive.
Yeah.
And I think with self-healing, the debuff to self-healing being so high, especially as you go up in the skulls, the ability to heal others and work together there, I think is really key too.
Well, I think that touches on something we didn't really talk about yet from a big picture standpoint is survivability here doesn't just mean you can heal yourself, because that's going to be severely limited. Right now, if you're a cleric or a favored soul, you'll still probably be able to heal yourself okay, particularly once you get some of the bigger heal spells. But when you're higher in epic levels and stuff, that cocoon may not cut it anymore. It probably won't, because it's not going to heal you for very much. There's things like health regen items probably aren't going to do a whole lot for you. So you want to kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about survivability in Reaper mode. We're not just talking about being able to self-heal because of how penalized that is. I think on one skull it's like 40% penalty to self-healing or something like that, and it just keeps going up. So keep that in mind when we're talking about survivability today.
I think eventually you get to the point where everything just gives you one point when you start getting closer to 10 skull.
Yeah, that's gonna make it hard. To be clear too, because Reaper has 10 skulls of difficulty. We're really going to be focusing on helping people build into the lower levels of Reaper. This cast is not intended to help you get necessarily from Reaper Skull 1 to Reaper Skull 10. That's a much bigger jump to be making. It will help, we hope, but our focus here is getting people into Reaper mode and kind of taking the scaredness factor, the fear factor away from it a little bit as best we can. So now that we talked about big picture, let's kind of focus in and talk about some things that you can really work on and more practically small things and that work up to that big thing of how you can really utilize your build. And one thing we talked about was UMD and wands and scrolls. So let's talk about that. So what are some ways that players can help utilize those resources besides just taking UMD?
Well, I mean, there's enhancements, wand mastery enhancements that will help increase the output of your wands and scrolls. That's one thing you can do. I'll
say, increasing your charisma is a way to go too, because that will help with your UMD skills. There's also kind of a trick that you can pull. There's a lot of classes actually that can use wands. So rangers can use cure wands. They can't use heal scrolls innately, but they do get to use cure wands. Paladins can use res scrolls because they have that as a, even though it's not a regular spell, it is a spell that they can add to their spellbook, so they qualify for using those scrolls. So you can play some tricks like that depending on if you kind of tweak your build for your character. Maybe splash a couple ranger or paladin levels in there, both of which can use cure wands as well.
I think you need the enhancements though to add Raise Dead, Resurrection, etc. to your spell list, though.
You do, but because you can do that, you can use the scrolls even if it's not part of your spell list. There's a similar thing with Favored Soul and Clerics can use Blur wands, even though Blur is not typically a divine spell, because there's an enhancement that allows Blur to be added to their spell book. they can use blur wands even if they don't have that enhancement.
Okay.
So you can look through that. Like if you ever see essentially most, if not all, spells that can be added to a spell book for a different class, usually you can use the wands and scrolls of that. And you can check that by looking at the scroll, or like if you look at the description, the scroll or wand, it'll tell you what level and what class you have to be to use it. And you can actually, I think, even then, if you're a little bit below that number, so like let's say a cleric, I think, can start using res scrolls at like level 6 with a % chance of using them or something to that effect. So you can actually start using them a little earlier than you get the spell in your spell book. It's just there's a % chance of being able to cast it under level.
Right.
Let's see. Anything else we want to say about wands, scrolls, and utilizing those?
Make sure you have them before you enter the quest.
Fair. We talked about last week getting the unbound version so you can pass them to others. It might be a little expensive.
For sure.
You can, of course, tell them that you'll expect the 10K gold in your inventory after you give them some scrolls and stuff, but no, consider using those. If you're wondering why we're saying those ones specifically, you can actually get bound to character ones from the House K guild vendors. They're cheaper marginally, but they're bound to character.
Just want to point out, if you can, please try to use resurrection scrolls as opposed to raise dead scrolls, because at least with a res scroll you'll get half your hit points and half your spell points back. Or is it all your spell points? Well, whatever it is, at least half your life back, and that could be a nice little buffer there before you can cure yourself.
Very much so.
You die,
getting a baby raise in the middle of combat when you can't self-heal, not very helpful.
Right.
Although, look, beggars can't be choosers all the time, so if it's between a raised dead and nothing, I mean, use the raised dead. But yeah, absolutely, use resurrection scrolls as much as possible. Let's see. Let's talk about how do you change your approach if you're building from 1 to 20 versus 1 to 30? Do you change your approach?
Well, I think you probably should. If you're just doing 1 to 20 stuff, the chances are that you're not really doing the high skulls. Because you just need to do one skull to get that extra 20%, and I'm just assuming that you're doing this one skull for the extra 20% so you can get through those, heroic lives faster. So, everything that we say, to survive, X number of skulls, you can dial it back, and take our advice to a lesser extent at heroic levels, as opposed to, doing the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 skulls at, when you get to level 30.
Yeah, Benton, I think you don't really change your approach because you mostly play Warlock.
Well, I actually do change my approach a little bit
okay.
If I'm building into epics versus just doing heroics. Really, through most of heroics, I just do DPS. DPS is good enough, although with update 36 coming, that may change, unfortunately. But, if I'm going into epics and higher skulls, I'll focus more on a DC approach, just because it goes faster.
Sure, yeah.
And that's something that you really notice the difference between heroics and epics. The in-boss health in epics, it takes a while to burn down an in-boss in epics versus heroics.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say, we kind of touched on this before too. You know, if you're just going from 1 to 20, consider that using UMD is going to be a lot harder at those levels, because once you get into epic levels, every level you take in epic, you get +1 to all of your skills, including UMD. So when you're playing in epics, it's a lot easier for classes that are considered to be typically less good at UMD, like barbarians. It's easier for them to use UMD in epics because of that. So again, this kind of goes back to what I was saying. You might consider splashing in a couple different things into your build, different classes. You know, it's also that idea that, you know, if in heroics, kind of what you're saying, it's easier to go DPS in heroics. DCs tend to be easier to land if they're not really high compared to epics. So if you're a DC build, you can probably get away with doing more splashing and less total focus on DC in that heroic range of stuff. But
are we going to rewind to 2007 where every tune gets one splash of Bard?
Actually, back way back when level cap was 12, my rogue actually had 3 levels of paladin for disease immunity and cure ones.
Oh, yep. I think, you know, when I ran back then Pallies that had Splash of Bard for higher UMD and a Sork that had Splash of Bard. That was a fun little build, too.
Yeah. All good options. Let's see. I think that kind of... Is there anything else you want to say about building... You can check on it on the forums, too. There's probably a lot of builds there that are really geared towards optimizing that level 1 to 20 range that you wouldn't really tend to go for in the epic levels. There's also, we should mention, too, there's kind of a reverse concept here, too, right? Because there's a lot of builds that maybe don't really shine until you get your epic destinies. So they might be harder to level from 1 to 20. Thinking kind of a Sharadi caster would be a good example of that, which is going to rely a lot on a lot of chain missiles, magic missiles, a lot of spell effects that don't typically do a lot of damage, but rely on Sharadi to really amp up their damage. There's probably a couple other examples of that too. So keep that in mind. You know, if you're building 1 to 30, you might have, if you're building a class that's going to really shine in epics, it may have struggles in heroics because it doesn't have that epic destiny stuff.
You know, and typically in those situations, and I don't do that often, but you know, I'm flexible, and so you know, change your build when you hit 20. You know, run it through heroics one way, and then rebuild it. You know, retool it when you hit epics, because that does happen a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you can work in there, and you can also consider things like what epic past lives are going to be toggling on. If you have the choice between, say, you've got some that are maxed out in more than one that's maxed out in each sphere, you can pick and choose which one maybe you're going to use depending on the scenario and what you're doing. So there's things to consider there. I would say, as an example of that, the self-healing one out of the primal sphere is probably not going to be as effective because your self-healing and your regen is going to be penalized. So you may opt to not use that one as opposed to using the colors of the queen one. So. Let's talk about buildings for survivability. There's a lot of things that you can do. I know Voodoo is a fan of, we were talking about it last week a little bit, of laying your defenses. So let's talk about how do you guys approach building defensively versus building offensively for running more Reaper?
I'll go first. I like there's a few things that I like everything for as far as defensive is concerned, but there are a few things that I prioritize over other things. So, for example, the blur. Blur is something that I got to have on every single creature, and the armor from Tempest Spine and the Hound makes that very, very easy to slot. But regardless, I've got to have Blur, and if I can cast, if I have a tune like a Warlock or something that can cast Displacement, that's even better. Those are just flat out chances just to be missed, which I think are probably really, really important. And then the next most thing that I like to prioritize, especially on high dex tunes, low armored tunes, is dodge. Another flat out chance just to be missed. When you get to tanking and things like that, where they have low, heavy armor and things of that nature, don't worry so much about dodge. Replace that. Put number 2 in the priority. Make that PRR, because that's a 100 PRR is fine for a backline kind of guy, but if you're going to be tanking stuff, you really need to have like around 240, 250 to 300 PRR.
Benton, what kind of approach do you take?
So, I think Arkat said some good stuff there. As you know, I primarily play casters, so displacement is key. I always keep that up. I like to play locks also, so dodge. I'll have dodge max to whatever the armor I'm wearing allows it to be, because as Arkat said, it's about not getting hit. Because as you get into Reaper, and especially a higher skull Reaper, if you get hit, you're dead. It doesn't matter how much PRR you have, or DR, obviously, if you get hit, you're going to die. So it's about not getting hit. So in addition to like displacement and dodge, and PRR, I do have PRR. I like to keep it between 130 and 150 on my casters, if possible. And then it's just about movement. So jump, tumble, and speed. Keep moving. Don't stand in one spot. If you stand in one spot, you're going to get hit. You're going to die. So it's really about being not being where the damage is, especially on a caster.
I think that's good advice, even if you're playing on a melee character, particularly when you start getting into raids and kind of the bigger bosses. They have a lot of attacks that they'll tell you that it's coming. Sometimes they even give you that really nice targeting receptacle on the ground, which actually we'll talk about a little bit later. We'll get into news. But move your feet, even if you're a melee, right? Like, you can move and change your arcs of where you're getting hit. I see a lot of people far too often, they don't react very quick, especially on melees. They just don't react on moving their feet. Really basic one, for example, would be Spinner of Shadows. She rears back with her weapon to make a very massive strike in the front arc. And as soon as she rears back, if you move, you're not going to get hit. She doesn't turn, generally, to still hit with that effect. Dragons would be another example with their breath weapons and stuff like that. You can react to a lot of those attacks and move, even on a melee.
And that's really what makes, one of the things that makes DDO and DDO combat so much cooler than most of the other games I've played, is that ability to react and move. And it's such an combat is such an active process in DDO. So move. And then I guess the other thing is spell absorption, that kind of stuff. Make sure you have that stuff available if you're going to be getting hit with a lot of spells. Because that will save a lot of damage.
Especially against some of the Reapers, can really get you. Kind of in a similar vein, Shield and Night Shield, spells, clickies. There's Warlocks, and I think it's in the Eldritch Night tree. There's an option for permanent shield on you, or maybe the Eldritch Night tree just gives you bonuses to shield. But
yeah, for locks, it's out of Enlightened Spirit.
Yeah,
that's like the only thing out of Enlightened Spirit I use.
But that gives you a permanent shield, the one out of Enlightened Spirit. But shield, Night Shield, both of those things stop magic missiles. And the reason why that's important is they never miss. So when the Reapers are casting magic missile at you, and each missile is hitting you for 20, 30, 60 damage in like level 5 quest, that's a huge difference. I mean, it makes a lot of difference in epics as well, but really look for those things. See, some other things...
Yeah, that really takes the teeth off the Plague Reapers.
Yeah. Some other things that we didn't really talk about in terms of defenses and layering. Fortification. We talked about this briefly last week. It's a big deal. Normally, when you're running quests on Elite, a critical hit, it's going to hurt, but it's not necessarily going to hurt that much. But keep in mind that because we're in Reaper, we're amplifying the damage that everything's doing, which means that those critical hits are going to further amplify that damage. So, if in Reaper mode the damage that monsters are doing to you is 50% more, a critical hit is going to be double what it normally would be. So you really got to watch that and get as much fortification as you can as early as you can get it. AC is probably not as useful as it used to be, but I think particularly in lower levels, it still has some value if you can get your AC up really high early. And there's a few tricks that you can do with that. So keep an eye out, particularly the lower levels.
Can we take a step back?
Sure.
Can we step back to the fortification issue?
Absolutely.
Sometimes, if you're a D&D player or Pathfinder player, and in D&D, if you get a heavy fortification item, like 100% fortification, you are completely immune to critical hits and sneak attacks and all that sort of stuff, precision type damage. But in DDO, that's not necessarily the case. My point is, don't stop with 100% fortification. More like go like 175, 185, 215. The reason why you want above 100 fortification in DDO is because sometimes monsters have little abilities that reduce your fortification. So if let's say somebody, one of these monsters can reduce your fortification by, 75%, 75 off of whatever fortification you've got. You better have 175 to still be, immune to critical hits. So, don't think just because you have 100% fortification, don't think you're set, because you're not.
Absolutely.
That's a great point. I had taken a little break from DDO and came back after a couple of years, and that was something that bit me right away. Heavy fort was no longer good enough. Because they have I forget. They have an ability to bypass fort, and then, as you mentioned, they can lower your fort at the same time as well, and that hurts.
Very much so. Let's see. So, I don't need to say anything more about AC. Resistances. Let's talk about resistances, because energy damage is kind of generally a good thing to have, but you gotta watch out for certain champions because they have damage over time effects of resistance types. So that stuff can really start to hurt if you don't. And I'm not just talking about relying on ship buffs. We're running Reaper. I think we can just make an assumption that you're gonna die at some point. So the ship buffs probably aren't gonna last you the whole quest. If they do, great on you. But have some resistance options, whether that's potions of resistance, being able to use a wand, because we're really pushing the UMD thing here. So wands of resist energy can be helpful. Being able to cast it, even if you're only casting 10 or 20 resistance, that's still better than nothing. Each one of those dots is going to hit you probably 6-7 times before they wear off. So if you're taking 10 damage off of each of those, that's still 60 to 70 points of damage that you're saving. So that can make a big difference. For the same reason, Voodoo was talking about getting poison resistance items, because you do get a poison dot as well, and that's a lot harder to come by.
Yeah, I all my tunes, I pretty much make sure I can get, a minimum of 30 on all my resists, preferably like 45, and some of them, depending on the class, I can get add my acid resistance. One of my tunes has 133 acid resistance. It's like, especially when you're doing like black and blue, and you're fighting that black dragon at the end, and the black dragon bolts that she can give you are just absolutely just insane. And 133 acid resist doesn't really. I mean, it's certainly helpful, but it isn't the be all to end all there.
In addition to the resist, using things like Fire Shield scrolls if you can't cast Fire Shield. Fire Shield is really good for fire and cold. It's a big help there. The ablative stuff that we used to use, the prots, they're not as effective anymore because of the damage, especially once you get into epics. The protections kind of have kind of been limited as really being useful. But anything that can resist or mitigate, MRR, also getting your MRR up will help with a lot of the elemental damage. In many cases.
The protection stuff I don't want to completely discount, because if you're running into a trap, that can be really helpful. If you you got to run through a trap and get some protection from energy, it will kind of help get through that little area. And we talked about Stone Skin wands last week and using Stone Skin as well. One thing we haven't mentioned yet in terms of mischance is Incorporality, which is not really available at lower levels, but when you get into the upper levels, you can start getting items that make you ghostly and gives you an Incorporality mischance, and it's just another layer that you can have on there. I did have my warlock somehow miraculously survived Storm Reaver, or not Storm Reaver, Sorjek on Reaper. On Reaper Tempest Spine, because the first shot I dodged, the second shot I got a blur displacement message, and the third one I got an Incorporality message. So all three of those hits I didn't get hit. The fourth hit killed me, but I made it a lot farther. So
yeah, Shadow Veil from Ninja Spy is really, really nice to have if you're a monk type tune. Very, very nice.
Yeah.
I know one thing I do get asked on occasion. People ask if displacement and blur stack. They do not. So it's either displace or blur. If displace is up, it's going to be taking effect. So it's not two separate chances.
Those both give you concealment chances. Or concealment bonuses. There are also several items that do that as well. Dusk, lesser displacement on items. Those all, if you read the description, they give you a concealment bonus. So none of that stuff stacks with each other. There is a little trick here that you can pull, though, that Cloud Kill, and I think a couple other ones. The spell Cloud Kill actually gives you... Well, it makes it harder for monsters to hit you, so it effectively gives you a concealment chance for them to miss. And I think it may actually still work on bosses. I'm not sure. I haven't tried it in a while. We used to use this all the time on Horoth and Tower of Despair when that was the end game. That you would drop a Cloud Kill on them because it would actually give you... it would, because usually they have True Sight, but that would actually kind of bypass that and still give you a % chance to miss. I'm not sure if they fixed that or if it's still the case, but at least with regular monsters, it'll help as well. Let's see, Death Block. I would recommend Death Block as much as you can get it. And we're not talking about Death Ward here. We're talking about Death Block. They're similar, but Death Block can't be dispelled, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, but it's also of limited use. I mean, it's really
Sure.
useful against things like Destruction and Finger of Death. Those insta-kill things. And that's good to have, but Death Ward is definitely more of more use, but unfortunately it can get dispelled.
I cannot tell you the number of times I've been running something and Death Ward was at my or Death Block was at my disposal, and I was not wearing it, and I paid a price for that. It does get you every once in a while.
Yeah,
It's usually one of
that's
those
it's
PK
definitely
hands.
one of those things you always have to have.
What were you saying, Ben?
I was saying it's usually one of those PK hands that you don't see coming.
Yeah, those ones get you pretty good. Or like the caster you don't think is gonna, you just kind of forget that that's one of the things that they can cast. Similar vein, freedom of movement, protection from evil, both helpful buffs that prevent you from getting crowd controlled. It can be advantageous. Anything else we should talk about in terms of defenses? We could say hit points, but that feels, pretty obvious at this point. Get more hit points.
Yeah, con is not a dump stat, people. Con is definitely not a dump stat.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if it counts under defense, but the ability to crowd control, even on a single target basis, some way to impede progress of the mobs.
What are you guys'
How
opinions?
about absorption?
Elemental absorption?
Yeah, elemental absorption seems to me something that, I think what's the best you can get, like 38%, or is it like maybe 45 or something? Elemental absorption also helps in especially high-level content. Like in the new raid, you got to have some electrical absorb. All that stuff is really, really useful to help you stay alive.
I think absorption, elemental absorption for me generally falls in the situational and knowledge kind of thing. If you know you're going to face it, then absolutely, and it's helpful. And we mentioned fire shield scrolls, so you can get fire and cold shield, which helps you on the fire cold versions of stuff. Out of the energy sheath from Draconic Incarnation, I favor heavily the electric shield one, because then I have 3 of the 4 elements that you can get that for, and acid is kind of typically the one that is not as big of a deal compared to electric and fire and cold. But again, it tends to be a situational thing that you kind of just got to know or will learn that these are areas that you want that. Although it's worth noting that Fire Shield protects you from webs.
Yep.
Which can be helpful at lower levels before you get freedom of movement. What's your guys' opinion on spell resistance? Is that something that you chase, or do you kind of generally ignore it?
I ignore it because, the only time that I've really seen spell resistance be useful in a high-level quest is in that one out in the Doomsphere one, the glacial, whatever the hell.
Ghosts
it is,
of Perdition.
where the Doomsphere is at the bottom. That's really the only times where I've really seen spell resistance actually be useful.
Yeah, I've never really focused on it. There's so many other things to focus on that it's hard to slot.
I think I have
But that said, I've been running some Drow lives lately, and it is awesome when you see the little blue flash around you. So
I would say that I probably suffer from a standpoint and a mindset of spell resistance wasn't useful for a long time because you couldn't get the numbers anywhere near high enough. So I kind of just learned to ignore it, and I've never really reconsidered it. I would say that if you can slot it in there, by all means, if it's an appropriate level. I have the sense that you will find more bang for your buck in heroic level than you will once you get into the epic levels with getting that to work. But you might find some use for it. Let's talk about healing amplification. And I'll just start by saying, if you're going to play a Warforged and you're going to run Reaper mode, you dang well better find as much healing amplification as you can muster.
yes, I would say every race should slot it, but unfortunately, as you've pointed out, Reaper mode hasn't brought back a lot of toaster hate, unfortunately. And so if you want to avoid toaster hate, slot healing amp.
And it's low-hanging
And
fruit
be
in
prepared
their
to show it
enhancement
to the
tree.
group leader.
Yeah, right. And it's it's
See, now
doable.
I'm a little bit of a different. I'm a little bit of a different. View on that. I prefer, at least on my Blade Forge tunes, I prefer to rely on community scribing. So instead of doing a healing amp, I do the repair one, and yeah, sure, I don't get a lot. I'm really not. I understand that there's a big penalty for self healing in Reaper, but I just feel like if I can get my repair amp high enough and my repair spell power up high enough, I'm not worried so much about other people healing my Blade Forge tune, whatever it is.
Yeah, and when I run a Blade Forge, I've done the same, and you can get away with that, especially in the lower skulls. But Communion, Communion holds up pretty well, but it drops significantly in the higher skulls. And and if you're at a point where your team's going to rely on you, and you're doing something important, and when you get into the higher skulls, it is teamwork. And they're not going to be able to heal you when they need to. I think you've got to consider that.
Something you can consider with that too is, if you have a good small group that you're gonna be reincarnating with and doing a lot of racial past lives and stuff together, consider, may I suggest, that you do your Warforged lives at the same time, and instead of having a cleric, you have a wizard with repair spells to help repair everybody.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Warforged doesn't have a great option like Communion in Blade Forged, so
True.
Warforged is even more difficult. So
Yeah,
I think that's a good point.
Agreed.
I want to circle back a little bit. My DDO stream in the chat is asking if physical resistance is any good. So he's talking about PRR, and we mentioned it before, but I think I can go into a little bit more depth. Is when you're talking about PRR, yes, get as much as you can. That's just the basic general outline. Having said that, each point of PRR at best will give you something like 0.065% damage or reduction of physical damage. So, and it becomes less and less and less and less. So once you get into the 150 range, each point is going to give you less. So you might want to consider that you're going to want to have, maybe instead of getting one PRR, you'd rather have one dodge at a certain point. Now, having said that, PRR will help you a lot, because even with as much dodge as you can get, you're going to get hit, period. It's going to happen. I don't have the math in front of me right now, but I did a couple years ago this comparison between should you go after PRR and dodge. And essentially what I proved from the math is that if you have maximum the 25% mischance on dodge compared to 50% reduction of damage through PRR, just one or the other, you would go something like 3 seconds without needing a heal in dodge compared to 4 seconds without needing a heal in PRR before you die, even though you were getting hit more often in PRR. Now, understand that those numbers were kind of a cheap, perfect scenario version of math for TDO as it applies. But the reason why I say that is, yes, PRR is very helpful, but if it's the only thing you get, it's only going to be helpful to a point. At a certain point, I don't really care how much PRR you have. Sorjek on Reaper and Legendary Tempest Spine is probably still going to 1 or 2 shot you. So it will help you to a point, but you're still going to get
5K
popped.
or 3K damage.
Yes. So just be aware of that. I'm not saying don't get it. And I personally think PRR is the best. If it's a choice between any of the defenses, and the points are more or less equal, I would choose PRR over dodge or the other ones, personally. But that only holds true to a point. If I've got 200 PRR and 3 dodge, I'm picking dodge over PRR at that point. So, okay, back more on topic. We're catching back to where we are. I wanted to talk about DCs in Reaper mode. And I think, Ben, you're probably the best one to kind of speak to this because of the three of us, you spend the most time playing a DC caster. How do you approach achieving and building for DCs when you're playing Reaper mode? Or do you just give up and go for DPS?
Oh, no. Honestly, I don't. Interestingly, I haven't had to approach Reaper much different than I approached Elite. When I build a DC caster, I go all in on the DCs I'm focused on. So you need to push them as high as you can. And really, as you get higher, I forget what the penalty is. I was trying to remember. I read this yesterday, so I guess I'm having a senior moment. But as you go up each skull, it does increase the DC needed by a factor. And shoot, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. So you've really got to focus on it. You've got to focus on maxing out your primary casting ability, and then all of the various bonuses you can get. Spell pin, interestingly, the other big part of being a DC caster is spell pin, and spell pin I don't think seems to be as doesn't seem to be impacted by higher skull levels, and so you don't need to really think about increasing your spell pin above where you had it for Elite. Like, if you were getting no fail and legendary Elite Shroud, then you're fine, or no fail and Tip is fine, Elite, you're fine. But for the DCs, you've really got to focus on them, and it usually means cutting out DPS. If you're deciding between a feat or an enhancement, and the choice is DC or DPS, go DC. If that's what you want to do in Reaper mode.
Yeah, it's definitely. Now, here's an interesting question. This is one that I've actually kind of been debating. Because it seems like the there's two spell schools that people tend to favor are enchantment or necromancy. Do you have a preference for Reaper mode specifically, and why?
It depends on what you want to do, really. I like killing stuff, and so I like necromancy. Again, it's preference what you want to do. If you want to kill stuff, if you want, go necro. If you want to hold stuff, if you want to charm stuff, whatever, go enchant.
I personally am going with personally with this philosophy that if you're going to be in Reaper mode, you're going to run into more champions, and champions are much more likely to have death block or death ward on them. So I'm favoring enchantment base because there's fewer things that can resist or just outright be immune to hold monster and stuff like that. That's my personal take on it, but
you'll find a lot of the champs now they're giving immunity to mind affecting effects. Like you can't hold them, you can't charm them, which sucks. But I think in that vein, enchantment probably lends itself to better party play because instead of killing stuff before your melees get to them, whatever, you can draw out some crowd control and let the melees participate too. So I'd say enchantment's probably better party play.
Sure. And it's not to say that some of those necro stuff doesn't work well too. I think we were talking about DCs and just playing in general. Things to consider are negative levels can make a huge difference. If you run into an orange name that you can't kill outright anyways, an energy drain might take off 50,000 hit points just in draining the levels that you can get for that. So that's an option as well. I've mentioned on the show a lot, Hypnotism is a great level 1 spell that has great uses because it reduces will saves, even if they save against Hypnotism, which they probably will. Because if you're like me, you're not heightening this thing. You're just using a cheap 10 spell points, -3 to will saves, and follow it right up with that mass hold. So, do you have any? Are you able to give us kind of a number that maybe players want to shoot for if they're looking? Maybe if you have them like at different level ranges, that'd be great. But at least end game, what is probably a DC that you want to at least get to have some decent effectiveness?
If you want to play high-end content, you need your DCs in the 90s, mid to upper 90s. Low 100s is better.
All right.
That's what I noticed. That's what I noticed too, Patrick. When my monk, I've got 109 stun DC, which isn't the best, but it did. Around 110 is about. It's pretty much no fail stun. So yeah, I think that number jives pretty much with Benton's DC for spells.
Yeah, Conjuration is getting a shout out in our chat room too for Web, which is a great spell and has a lot of benefits to it.
For sure.
The only thing with Conjuration is there's not as many other Conjuration spells, so you can absolutely use it. And I'm not trying to poo-poo it. Just consider that you've got a lot more necromancy and enchantment options than you do Conjuration options when you're talking about crowd control. So, all right. So I want to close this out with. So we got three things I want to talk about, and we'll try to keep these parts a little bit shorter. Specifically, let's talk about some builds or enhancements, feats that are particularly useful in Reaper mode that we haven't really talked about right now or up to this point. Do you have some suggestions that
Can I
people...
go first?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So if you're going to do low skull Reaper, and if you're let's say you're a ranged character like an arcane archer, if you take Scion of the Shadowfell, some of the damage that you deal, you get back. You're healed, so it's unarmed and weapon damage. You get a D6 of healing every time you hit. Well, if you have a high healing amplification, then you can get, like maybe 15 or 21 points of damage healed just by shooting an arrow at somebody else. So if you're in low skull, obviously in Reaper that's going to be, cut off, cut down by a bit. But if you're in low skull Reaper, it's still, one or two skulls. It's still, a great way to heal yourself. So look at Scion of the Shadowfell for all your range tunes.
Benton, do you have any favorites that you like to get?
I'm trying to think of how I build my casters. I don't think there's anything in particular that I get for Reaper mode that I didn't get for Elite mode. At least I'm drawing a blank at the moment.
Sure. So I'll throw a couple out here. Force arrows from the Arcane Archer tree give you Ghostly on that, which can be really helpful for hitting the Reapers. Knight of the Chalice, one of the core enhancements, also gives Ghost Touch, which my DDO stream is mentioning in the chat room. So those are good options for being able to get those Reapers. Paralyzing arrows out of Arcane Archer as well. I know there's a DC function to it, but I have seen it be pretty useful. And look, everything rolls ones eventually, so it can be a helpful thing to have. Just in general, ranged builds, if for no other reason, then it's harder for things to hit you if they can't reach you. So being able to put some distance between you and other things tends to be a really popular method. And there's some really strong range builds out there. Great crossbows knock things down on Vorpal, so that can be really, really helpful just by using great crossbows. Arkat and I were talking about Pin and Otto's Whistler before we started, and Pin is pretty good and it slows them down. I tend to find that monsters are moving around more, so I actually twist in Otto's Whistler on my Ranger and Epic levels. It's a little tricky to use because you got to get the timing right, because they have to actually be moving when you hit them. So that can be something to consider. But If you get it to land, it dances them. There's no save on it, so it's just instant CC, which is really nice. You're mentioning we talked about warlocks a lot, and they're popular for a reason. One of the things that's really nice about them is they have a lot of options for getting temporary hit points. And if you see temporary hit point generation, it's a great thing for Reaper mode because there's no penalty to temporary hit points in terms of, quote, self-healing. So that can be really helpful. Cocoon does the same thing, and then it gives you 150 temporary hit points for a short period of time. So that can be helpful as well. You were mentioning, Arkat, some attacks that give you hit points back. Body Feeder, although I think that's an older version. You can still get a body.
That's an old low-level one.
It is, but you can get a Body Feeder Scimitar. Finian's Bite, I think is what it's called. I think it's in Korthos somewhere. That can be really helpful because it gets you 15 temporary hit points every once in a while, which can be really good. Life Shield in the same vein. Look for things that give you temporary hit points. There's a lot of there are weapon effects that still give you temporary hit points and spell points, and put negative levels on things at the same time, so that can be really great.
Yeah, that Bastard Sword out of Caught in the Web is really great for that kind of stuff. It gives negative levels, and it also does vampirism. So, you can swing a whole hell of a lot, and you have a good healing amp. Then you can get a lot of hit points back very, very quickly and deal out a lot of negative levels.
Yeah, circling back to Pin and Otto's Whistler a little bit, something I didn't mention too. The reason why I favor Otto's Whistler over Pin is because if it lands, they can't do anything. If Pin lands, they move slower, but they can still swing at you. So it's something to consider. You could also, out of the same tree, the Frosty enhancement, the Frosty stance, cold stance for
stay frosty.
Yeah, it has a chance to slow movement as well. There's lots of enhancements,
Right.
like leg wound, I think it is, hamstring and stuff that slows things down. These are all great things that you can use. Anything that makes them move slower, it makes it easier for you not to get hit. Anything else you guys can think of that maybe you want to mention in here? All right. The last thing I'll mention.
I don't think so.
The last thing I'll mention in this category is skill focus UMD. We talked about it as a feat, or we talked about the skill. If you need a little help getting your UMD up, for a feat you can get +3 to your UMD, which sure, there's a lot of things you might want to have more than that, but again, staying alive and getting people back to life really increases your DPS and your crowd control and just general party effectiveness. Okay, let's flip the script a little bit. Builds are things that you might want to avoid. I would recommend anything that is heavily reliant on self-healing. I got nothing against Pale Masters, but Pale Masters tend to be very self-healing, so you may find that it's hard to really be survivable and get yourself healed up running on Reaper mode, particularly higher skulls, unless you have. This is another one. If you can utilize group mechanics and you have a cleric that has harm, you might get better bang for the buck because you got someone else that can at least heal you. But builder beware. Pale Masters is maybe not the best their choice. Same token. If you're gonna be Warforged and you're not gonna invest in healing amp, we're gonna be relying on your own self healing. Builder beware. You may die a lot, or go through a lot of scrolls and potions. If you're gonna do that, at least bring reconstruct scrolls to give to your party members that they can use instead of heal scrolls. Anything else you guys want to mention here?
Rogues tend to get their, especially the sneaking around kind of assassin type rogues. They tend to get their ass kicked quite a bit in Reaper, from what I've seen.
Yeah, they can be
The real squishy kind.
like Benton said at the beginning, right? Glass Clanets may not want to apply. Or was that Arkat?
Right.
I remember.
Yep.
So, all right. Last thing I want to talk about is spending points in your Reaper trees. What advice do we have to give to people for spending points in your Reaper trees?
I'm not really good to give advice as far as what to spend in your Reaper trees, because quite frankly, I don't have a whole lot of Reaper experience. Action points for my trees. So, if just generally, I tend to if it were me, what I would do if I had them would be to concentrate in the tree that was most like the tune that I have. So, if I had a melee tune, I would pretty much concentrate standing on the, in the melee, on the melee tree. Keep in mind that those cores, the 1, 2, the bottom 6 ones, those can apply not only just in Reaper mode, but in all the other difficulties as well. So don't not fill those things out.
Yeah, I from a DC caster standpoint, the caster tree is really nice. There's some good stuff in there for bumping your DCs, bumping your primary casting ability, Giant or Wiz, and then also bumping spell pin. Some really good stuff in there. But I tend to vary how I fill the trees as I go through a level. When I hit level 4, I put as many points into the defensive stuff as possible, so that you're a lot more survivable in heroics as you're running. And then as I get closer to 20 and then into epics, I heavily weight more towards the caster tree, and I still put as many points as possible in defense, but I think it really you load it depending on your situation, or at least that's how I look at it.
I would say there's basically two things to be going for: DCs and hit points. That's kind of how I've come to look at the trees. If you're using tactics or DC spells, then yeah, you want to get those DCs up. Otherwise, hit points, hit points, hit points, hit points. Look, I like that there's melee power in the trees, but I'm just going to suggest that one melee power or ranged power is not worth 4 hit points. Especially if you're running Reapers and Heroics, you're on that racial reincarnation train and really trying to grind out some Reaper XP. I can tell you from experience, there's a big difference between the player that has 100 hit points and the players that have 200 hit points out of Reaper trees on top of what they have normally. That's a huge difference. So, that's not to say that you don't get other stuff with those as well, but the hit points just seems to be hit points or DCs. If you don't need the DCs, you're not using DC stuff, grab the hit points. That's kind of how I'm looking at it these days. Although I do like the enhancement trees.
On the way to the...
I do like the enhancement boost kind of memento things that give you. I mean, you can get plus 45 to double strike or range or spell power and stuff like that. Those are great. Don't get me wrong, but.
Yeah, I was just going to say, on the way to getting those hit points, you pick up some really cool stuff out of that tree, too. You get some good PRR, bumps to saving throws, bumps to dodge, and collecting hit points at the same time.
Yep. All right. I think anything else you guys want to say about building for Reaper mode before we move on to game news?
Yeah, I'd just want to say that Reaper is hard, and obviously 1 skull is easier than 5 or 6 or 10 skulls. But if you're a new player, I would seriously just advise that you think twice about going into Reaper dungeons, especially the the mid or high skull ones, because Reaper is just not for new players. It just isn't. You need to you need to optimize your builds, and you need to have really good equipment to really do well and contribute in Reaper. So please, it is an advanced difficulty for experienced players. So please at least consider that when you're considering joining a Reaper group.
I would say, just as a closing thought, kind of along a similar line, don't be afraid of trying Reaper mode. There isn't a huge difficulty jump from Elite to one skull, generally. There's a little bit more randomness with the Reapers, and there's some quests that jump's going to be a little bit more than others. But if you're finding that you can handle Elite generally with few to little problems, you're probably ready for Reaper mode. And also, if you're not really sure if you're ready for Reaper mode, if there's someone who's got an LFM up and they've got a bunch of players already in the group, and maybe you've seen that name running a lot in that, they're probably able to accommodate someone who is not up to their quote level of play. So don't be totally afraid of trying Reaper mode. But what Arkat's saying is correct. You need to understand that it's going to be more difficult, and if you're not prepared for it, you may not enjoy it as much if you're not built and geared and ready to try it as well. So
yeah, dying a lot tends to make people frustrated. So I agree.
At the same time, it's look at running the storm out. I think there's value of us pulling someone in who hasn't run the quest before and knowing that they're going to get zapped a whole lot, because it gives them that experience like, oh, that's what this is going to be like. So
yeah, those guys weren't lying when you said to have energy sheath, that sort of thing.
But look, have fun. Reaper mode can be a lot of fun, and we're not trying to scare you. We just want to make sure that if you go in, if you're a new player and you take your first character in and you just start playing Reaper mode, you're probably going to get smacked around. It's probably not going to be that much fun. But you play a little while and get some gear and build yourself up to it, and the game has difficulty levels for a reason, and find the skull that's appropriate for you and your party, and have fun. So, all right, let's talk about game news.
Well, that's the most important part, right?
Yeah.
Have fun.
Let's talk about some game news. We'll have some fun. There's some fun stuff to talk about here. Starting with Update 36 changes. Steelstar posted a bunch of stuff that they're looking to change. It's looking to be a large update. There's some great new content. We're looking at 5 quests, including a capstone quest and the new stuff. There's artificer changes that we've talked about, a fairly large number of bug and quality of life fixes. There's also going to be a few changes they wanted to let us know about before Illuminati in order to provide some design insight and provide a bit of advance notice. So, let's talk about those. Arcane Archer. With Update 36, the following changes are being made to Arcane Archer, both the Elf and Ranger version. Arcane Archer imbue toggles will only grant their effects while wielding a longbow or a short bow. They were able to kind of go back and retweak this a little bit based on feedback. They fixed it in a way that acts closer to swashbuckling. So you must be carrying a longbow or a short bow to toggle the Arcane Archer imbues on. Once they're on, you can freely swap things in your main hand, but if you don't have a longbow or a short bow, the imbue effects won't hit you until you put one of those things back on. It still needs to be vetted by QA, but it seems it resolves a lot of the issues that were there. People were concerned about. So that's kind of the change there. Basically, they said for a long time it's been possible to use Arcane Archer toggles with weapons that aren't bows. Those abilities, by their wording, are only meant to work with bows, but there are currently ways of getting around that. The past Rangers, around Update 28, put some changes in place to stop that were basically unsuccessful. They're interested in creating better balance between bows, crossbows, and other forms of ranged combat in the long term, but in order to make that work, they had to fix Arcane Archer as it's intended to be. Let's see. Warlocks. this is going to be kind of more the nerf changes, as it were. Warlocks now receive Eldritch Blast base die feats at levels 4, 8, 12, 16, and 20 for a total of 6d6 at level 20 instead of their previous progression. Characters will automatically be adjusted to match that new progression. The Epic Eldritch Blast feat now grants 3d6 to Eldritch Blast, and the Epic Eldritch Blast Destiny feat now grants 4d6. So the idea there is the DPS was basically too high. So what they've done with the Eldritch Blast is they took some of that power out of the heroic and they moved it into those epic feats. So if you have both of those epic feats, you will have the same amount of Eldritch Blast damage once you have those two feats that you do now with those two feats. But if you don't take those feats, or until you take those feats, you'll lose, I think, 2 or 3d6. Or you'll lose 3d6 of that damage. On live, when they reach level 20, they have 96. This is going down to 66. They're trying to balance heroic versus epics with the damage. They like where it's at in epics. They don't like where it's at in heroics. So that's what that changes for.
But then they gimped epic warlocks, unless you spend 2 feats to get your power back to what it was in heroics.
True, yes.
And epic warlocks were already underpowered compared to a lot of other characters in DPS, at least with the tunes we run we run with on Kyber mostly. So yeah, I'm really, although I don't run a DPS build mostly, I'm really unhappy with that change. It seems pretty extreme and more detrimental to a lot of warlocks in epics than it should have been.
Yeah, I have to agree with Benton. Warlocks did need to be, somewhat reeled in for heroics, but they were not that great of great DPS and epics. They pretty much stayed the same, except for maybe a couple of extra dice because of those those feats. But the stuff that in epics just scaled so ridiculously, the monsters and whatnot, their hit points, and just so ridiculously way more than in heroic that just a slight improvement for warlocks and epics really they were so far behind, and now they're going to be behind even further. So it just I think their data, their quote unquote data, wasn't showing what they thought it was showing them, and that warlocks are definitely not out of control in epics, and now they're worse.
Well, I think what they're trying to address is the data that says that they're overpowered in heroics, and they're trying to put that back in a way that they already have it. Which I get what you're saying.
No, I agree.
So some of the other changes in Enlightened Spirit, the light damage on all Eldritch Blasts on weapon attacks is now 1d4, 2d4, 3d4, which is a change from, I think it's 1d6, 2d6, 3d6. So it tones that down a little bit. The bigger change is the Eldritch Burst additional light damage is now 1d6. The Spirit Blast additional light damage is now 4d6. I believe those were 3d6 and 10d6 currently. So that's a pretty big drop down.
Wow.
Yeah. Which on the one hand makes it a lot.
Impact in epics.
Yeah. It does make it a lot easier for me to give up the Spirit Blast though, for my DC lock compared to DPS. So.
I don't run Enlightened Spirit a lot, but what I think they're forgetting is that Enlightened Spirit is a great way for first lifers and or newer players that don't have all the past lives that some of the vets have. It's a great way for them to be able to participate in in-game content. And by nerfing Enlightened Spirit so much, again, as you know, I don't build Enlightened Spirit, but by nerfing it so much, I think they're actually going to hurt some of the newer players. I think there's a lot of cookie cutter builds and easy button players that have been running Enlightened Spirit builds, but who really cares at the end of it? If you don't like them, don't group with them. But again, I think this is going to hurt newer players and first life characters quite a bit as far as their ability to participate in in-game content.
Yeah.
My wife's a fairly new player, and she's not real happy. She does Enlightened Spirit Warlock as one of her favorite tunes, and she's really upset with this.
Yeah, it's gonna really tone down their DPS. I'm kind of hoping that they'll land somewhere in the middle. Personally, I agree. So their internal and live data basically is giving them the conclusion that Warlock DPS is unquestionably too high in heroics. I think it's pretty hard to disagree with that statement. I'm not sure that this is. I think maybe they're going too far down, personally. So I'm kind of hoping that we'll see this on live, or they'll see it on Lemania and maybe adjust it a little bit more up, or maybe they could. If the issue is that it's too much in heroics and it's not enough, but they like where it is in epics, I'd like to see them maybe tie character level into some of these things so that maybe you can get some extra. It keeps going up into epics without having to take extra feats and stuff like that. So, in any case, that's the change that they're looking at doing. We'll see how they work. Hopefully, players still like playing Warlock afterwards. Spell resistance. With update 36, the following changes are being made to spell resistance. Drow and Deep Gnome's spell resistance now stacks with all other sources of spell resistance. The majority of item-based sources of spell resistance have had their values reduced by about a third, which is not insignificant. And Fear of the Wild's Ward Against Weird ability is now a primal bonus to spell resistance, which stacks with most other sources, and has new values of 5, 30, 60, which is pretty crazy high. So what they said on this is, in Update 36 cycle, they set out to finally make Drow and Deep Gnome's racial spell resistance stack with other sources. In analyzing the numbers involved, it came to their attention that the math used to determine values in the new Cannith Crafting, new Loot Gen, and recently named items calculated spell resistance was wrong. As a result, the numbers available were much higher than they were comfortable with before adding and stacking Drow and Deep Gnomes. With this change, a character without racial spell resistance equipping maximum available sources of spell resistance should be within a striking distance of the necessary spell resistance to resist high difficulty monstrous spells. It will be very difficult, if not impossible, at certain ranges to get a no-fail value on those characters in high difficulties. With Drow and Deep Gnomes values now stacking, however, those characters can much more easily compete against enemy spells.
One thing about spell resistance, Steel Star, I think Steel Star made a post regarding monks. One of the players kept needling or prodding, and they had, hey, listen, what about spell resistance for monks? How that's going to stack? And there was no answer for a long time. But finally, Steel Star just the other day said that, monk spell resistance is not going to stack with Drow spell resistance, but it will stack with items. Item spell resistance. So if you had a Drow monk with a bunch of spell resistance equipment on, you thought you would be in good shape, but no, you're not. The only spell resistance that's going to stack is your Drow spell resistance with the equipment spell resistance, and it'd be like, why are you even a monk at all if you wanted spell resistance? So the monks are getting hosed, at least initially, in this update.
Well, it seems like they're putting Drow, Deep Gnome, and Monk on the same channel for spell resistance. That's how I kind of understood it.
Which is odd because racial things always have stacked with class things, which have always stacked with equipment things. But they're basically now saying a class thing with a race thing no longer stacks.
Yeah, it is kind of weird. I don't really understand why they're doing it that way, other than maybe they don't want it to get too crazy, and they want it to have some. They don't want it you to be able to reliably get to a no-fail against high difficulty stuff. That's the only thing I can come up with. Again, spell resistance is not something that I paid a lot of attention to because for a long time it wasn't really that viably helpful. So.
Right.
We'll see how it works. Again, not a area that I can speak to a lot. Although if you want spell resistance, Fury of the Wild's ward against weird ability, there's a nice twist for you. I think that bumped up pretty significantly. Aggro and stealth. With update 36, the following changes are being made to aggro and stealth. Monsters will take the distance of their targets into account. Closer targets are more likely to be targeted, assuming they have not yet taken much damage compared to live. If a monster kills or loses their primary target, they'll now aggro correctly on who has the most hate next, as opposed to the closest target, as they often do now on live. Although I'm not entirely sure in terms of rating if I'm happy about that. If I'm the archer in the back and the tank dies, I think I'd rather it go after the closest thing rather than me. Monsters with the C stealth property will now display an angry red icon to anyone observing them in stealth. Note, the see-through stealth property, aka Tremor Sense, is not true sight or see invisibility. Those abilities don't actually affect sight checks against players just using the stealth skill. For example, spiders and slimes typically have the see-through stealth property per 3.5 edition rules. Red and purple name bosses also tend to get that ability. These changes were the result of listening closely to player feedback and examining of monster AI in regards to stealth gameplay, which I don't really do a lot. So, although it's interesting to see, there are some cases where the aggro mechanics seem to be a little weird, but I don't know that we're ever going to move past that because it's a computer algorithm figuring out AI and what the monsters should do. So. And then lastly, area of effect spells. With update 36, most area effect spells cast by enemies, such as Ice Storm and Web, now have visible indicators of their boundaries on the ground. Should make more clear where enemy effects begin and end, and improve players' ability to analyze the battlefield. In that vein, can we please fix the Philo of the Just targeting system? Because that's been broken forever. And basically makes the end fight... It makes the end fight nigh unbeatable once that stuff starts happening. So,
does anyone run that now?
Not really. There's still some good loot in it, though. But I think it was never really a popular one to begin with because of the lag issues and because of that end fight being broken and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, we tried to go in there on Reaper mode, but the lag when everything spawned, each time we went in, the lag was just so bad. We never got to continue the fight.
I got a group in there, and we were running it on Reaper mode, like Reaper 1 Skull, and we weren't really having lag problems. But what we basically discovered is that Reaper mode seems to scale orange and red names a little bit more than non-named monsters, and everything in there is an orange or red name. So we got plastered. It'd be fun to try again, but. It did not go well at all. All right. There was a little bit of news on Update 36 hitting Lemania. They're planning on having it hit Lemania. Update 36 hit Lemania between the 27th and 29th, but it's subject to change if they nail down a stable build. The preview should include all 5 new quests. The one is very likely not to be particularly close to being finished and will likely not be in much of a shape for players to actually get a sense for. They're planning on putting a lever in there to complete it so that you can complete that quest and be able to run the capstone quest. There's going to be a new public area, some other stuff we've already talked about. They'd love to have everyone come and experience the preview and tell us what you think. They'll almost certainly be holding a dev event where some of them from the team will be online answering questions to run some of the content with you. They'll give some more exact details in the coming days. There was some... the current schedule has only one Lemania preview for Update 36 slotted. That could change depending on how next week's preview goes. But they would suggest making your plans around the assumption it will be the only Lemania preview. He answered some questions. He says he believes that heroic versions are level 15 and the legendary version is level 31 for the new quests. The adventure pack in Update 36 takes place in the Forgotten Realms. They are not attached to the Underdark Wilderness area. Instead, they can all be accessed from the new public area. The plan at the start of the year was for Update 36 content to take place in the Stonelands. That had to change in the past few months with the adventure pack primarily now takes place in the Underdark, focusing on Redacted and Redacted with an emphasis on Redacted. The current he also kind of chimed in on what Lomania schedule looks like these days. The current typical Lomania scheduling scheme is to aim for Tuesday through Thursday previews. They specifically no longer do weekend previews, including if they can help it on Fridays. In addition, Mondays are typically reserved for being able to verify the preview build for the release. That allows devs to crunch and get last-minute changes in over the weekend if need be, which is not possible if they set the code lock deadline for the Friday before a Monday preview. They recognize that scheduling does not work for everyone, but it is not likely to change. Bonus days. Through this weekend, you get plus 50% crafting XP boost. If you've been waiting to level up your crafters, now would be the time. That should make it significantly easier to do. Store news. There was a question on the forums about if Lotro's in-game store has come back. Why haven't we got it in DDO yet? And the response was they would have done that. However, the Lotro in-game store launch did not go smoothly. Instead, large issues were identified, and they've had engineers working them out before also going live with the new internal store browser in DDO. Hey, for a change, Lotro was the guinea pig instead of us.
I was just going to say that.
It's usually been the other way around. Free to play and a lot of other things. In any case, so sales for this week. You can honor your guild, get 20% off of Astral Shards, Guild Renown Elixirs. You can also get 50% off of Guild Charters and Guild Airship Beacons. You can also get a free Bell of Opening with the coupon code KNOCK. And that will bring us to our community news. So the 240th Chronicle, LSD 37 has consolidated a number of fantastic guides and programs into the Compendium Lite. Well done, sir. I don't know if you guys have looked at this, but it is impressive, and a tip of the hat to that gentleman there. Pang has also created a Saga spreadsheet. Go ahead.
I was going to say LSD has done a lot of stuff for the DDO community, and if you guys can just pile on the rep for him, that's a big deal. But I mean, do so, because he's done quite a number of really cool stuff.
Yeah, the other thing in the similar vein, Pang created a Saga spreadsheet for others to use. So if you want help on your bookkeeping and tracking your character stuff, check out these two links from the Chronicle that are on the forums. It's great stuff that you can access and will help you kind of navigate the world of DDO and planning stuff. The Guild Hall, the Knights of the White Rose are an Orion-based guild looking for advanced and new players. They're looking for loyal, helpful, honest, and caring people to join. Find Adeline in the game for invite. The comment for the week, don't make a bard angry or they'll blank. Anybody got a clever answer here?
I'm sorry, you cut out. What was it? Don't make a what angry or they're blank?
Don't make a bard angry or they'll blank.
Cry?
Let's say they'd write you in to write a song, a really mean song about you. Which, if you think about it, I mean, that is not unlike what happens today occasionally. So, the fan site news, DDOCast, we got a shout out for our Reaper difficulty tactic episode last week, kind of a companion one with this one. DDO Players News, lots of locks in their latest show. Damsels of DDO fail their video save, but talk on for their 69th episode. Axel talked about sentient weapons in a video. An even note gnomes her way around, which for her is, I think she gets lost really easily, so that's probably a really fun article to read. SIP returned to DDO, so you can check that out. Strimtom delved into cleric changes, and Mickey journals her latest rating. Some other videos. Axel has a video on what makes raids great, so you can see his thoughts on that. Tactilicious and Craftilicious looked at Red Fens on his third Dragonborn life. And here's a fun one. I really like this article. This was from Confessions of a Geek Mom. She's talking about D&D and social skills. She has her younger daughter has some, I'm not exactly sure what the diagnosis is, but her younger daughter has some challenges with interacting with other people. I think she's autistic, but I'm not positive on that. But so she's talking about using D&D to improve her social skills, which I think is a great way to use D&D, not just for kids that have those kind of learning and cognitive disabilities, but just kids in general. Social skills are probably in short supply in the world today, unfortunately. So she's talking about using D&D to help improve social skills of her children. So a great read, fun little article. And best of luck to her as she wades into the world of dungeon mastering for her children. So have fun there. I like dungeon mastering. Dungeon mastering is fun. Let's see. DDOCast news. DDOCast is going to be on hiatus for a little bit longer than we thought. We were gonna try and play this last week, and my schedule changed, and then I've got work the next coming weeks. So the plan is to be back on July 11th, and hopefully the whole group doesn't disband between now and then like it did last time.
Oh, I can wait. July 11th's fine. I'll be there.
Also, some general gaming news. The 10th anniversary soundtrack for Lotro was released through major digital music outlets, which I'm a little jealous for. It would have been cool if we'd have had a 10th anniversary soundtrack for DDO. That would have been awesome. Also, as well, if you're going to Gen Con, don't forget to gather for buffs as well while you are there. With that, we'll get into Lightning Post, and there was a lot of great thoughts from a lot of people about our tactics in Reaper mode, so I'll try to cruise through a bunch of them that I can. Fuzzy Duck said, knowing your enemy is important. Don't just rely on the same spell ability for all enemies. Target their weaker saves. He also likes to ensure that he has no save effects. We don't really talk about this from a build perspective, but I think it's a good thing to keep in mind and look for. He mentions a couple of things. Power word spells are ones that obviously come to mind and are really great there as well. Control and halt undead as well, which it has a save if the undead think, but if they're not, like most skeletons and zombies, it's pretty effective as well. Other no saves.
How about implosion? Is that a DC?
It has a DC, yeah. And spell penetrating.
Okay.
Ben, are there any other spells that kind of come to mind as no save spells that you particularly like?
Power word stun. I think you already mentioned the power words, though, and then the irresistible dance is a good one. That saved me in a few instances.
When it was new, I crowd controlled Epic Devil's Assault before there were like Epic Normal Heart, just Epic on a sorcerer, using basically irresistible dance the entire time, just going around and dancing everything. It was more effective than you would think.
Quickened on a Sork, that would be pretty good.
Worked okay. For metamagics, remember you can have multiple instances of the same spell on hotbars with different metamagic configurations. He usually has quickened and empowered healing for in-combat use, and then non-boosted versions between fights. That's a great way to conserve spell points, I gotta say. Let's see. He also says older quests can be a good place to try out Reaper difficulty. I love this thought. Those quests were calibrated to the game's state at the time, so player potential power level was a lot lower, so they can be somewhat easier to run. That's a great tip. So, and he also gave a shout out for legendary Greensteel, the ooze summon things, because he just likes to unleash oozes on things. It'd be kind of fun. I'm curious, Ben, because we've had conversations about this before. What do you like for legendary Greensteel items?
Good question. Salt is awesome. On my Blade Forged, I do the was it Legendary Radiance, the one that gives you the healing amp. That's gotten me through some Reaper epic content. When it gives you like 1,000. It gives you like 1,000 hit points. I'm drawing a blank again. Sorry about that. Basically, it gives you 1,000 hit points periodically, and then it also buffs up your healing amp. So that's really nice in Reaper mode for a toaster.
Yeah. I'm actually thinking about making a healing amp item or a weapon for my tank to use when he's primarily shield blocking. So
Vacuum is
sure.
good. Vacuum is good.
Yeah, and actually I dual wield salt and vacuum on one of my tunes. It's a really nice combo.
Sure.
Clubber Lang from Sarlona, Roran said, great show as always. He didn't realize that core Reaper enhancements work outside of Reaper. That's an excellent tip. You can always, if you're wondering how to tell which ones do and don't, they literally tell you in all the descriptions. It will say, in Reaper mode, ... If it says that, it only works in Reaper mode. If it doesn't say that, it always works. That's how you tell the difference. Few thoughts that he wanted to mention. Sun Flasks. You mentioned cookies and Ghost Touch, but it's worth calling out the Sun Flasks as his #1 means of defeating Reapers before reaching level 4. Great tip. I love Sun Flasks, especially if you, he said, and he even mentioned this as well, and last time I checked as well, if you're in wolf or bear form as a druid, you can equip Sun Flasks, and you don't use them. They don't, because you don't throw them. So great way to use those. Great tip to save those when the cookies come around. He mentions the Lumeric
Wait a
Longbow.
minute. So you can throw them and they'll affect, but they won't actually. The stack won't actually go down.
Well, you don't throw them in wolf or bear form. Wolf and bear form, you can use returning weapons, but as melee attacks, and they don't throw.
Oh, I see. Okay, so what's their effect then if you have it in your offhand?
They're Ghost Touch, and they do a lot of light damage.
No kidding.
You don't do them in your offhand. They go in your main hand, just like any other weapon. But
Right.
But if you're in druid or if you're in wolf or bear form as a druid, you can use throwing weapons, and you get the benefits of them. You just don't throw them, so they don't go away.
Yes, I didn't know you would. I didn't know that Sunflash would work that way in a bear druid, for example, or a wolf druid.
It's great for undead and oozes. I did not think about it until Cobalang mentioned it, that because they're Ghost Touch, they'll work great against Reapers as well. So he also mentioned the Lumeric Longbow. It's a minimum level 4 Ghost Touch longbow with a red slot, which you get from turning in the Scarlet Scarab powder from Necro 1. It's a great one there. He says to equip it with Lawbane or Lawful Outsider Bane arrows and have fun with Reapers. He likes the Eternal Wand of Magic Missiles as well for Reapers, because they're incorporeal. He mentioned stacking death penalties. It's more of an issue in Reaper than other modes of play. Kingly Recovery, Rejuvenation Dawn, and Unyielding Sovereignty take on greater importance because they clear those as well. We didn't talk about that for enhancements that you can take, but those are great tips as well. He suggests a variation on shield blocking in doorways, freezing monsters in those choke points, even better, and turning them into a barricade that people can't pass. A great way to do it. He mentions Scrolls of Flaming Sphere. It's fun to stack a half dozen outside the door and slower gameplay with dotting and perching. It's not a bad tactic before you reach level 4. He also mentions body pulling, which is where you go into stealth or invisibility and attract attention of just a few monsters. I think that's a little bit harder to do these days, but it's still definitely worth doing. Let's see. He also mentioned that your Reaper XP follows your previous life. So we didn't mention this on either show, and we probably should have. When you reincarnate, you don't lose your Reaper XP, so you keep it through all of your lives. Thank bloody goodness. That would be ridiculous if you didn't. He also says he finds that tactics fighters can shine in skulls 1 to 3, but range builds are better suited for higher skulls. I do not disagree. You get hit a lot harder in melee than you do in range. Caius wrote in and says, best tips. 1, work with your party members' strengths and weaknesses as players and not just their builds. 2, in the case of pugs, don't rush the group to start the quest, which is also a great one as well. Let's see. Hohen says, talking about Reaper tips, here's one from him. Do not split oozes and slimes. Whenever you split them, there's a chance that they will split and become a champion and spawn additional Reapers. Good tip. I think, though, if you split them, they don't get their bonuses to Reaper. But I'm not like their Reaper bonuses to the monster, but I'm not positive on that. But they do absolutely spawn as champions when you split them, so watch out for that. See some other tips. Amber Cyan said that the permanent level 3 hireling that comes with the $10 starter pack has divine vitality. You can pull her out, use all the divine vitality charges, and then dismiss her, and then pull her out again 5 minutes later, which works pretty well. Although I think you have to go back to the beginning of the quest to keep pulling her out, so keep that in mind. Piles of champions have True Sight, and so render Dusk, Blur, and Displacement useless. But only 2 champions have Dodge, Bypass, and only they're on the higher tiers, so keep that in mind. He was talking about chimed in about the cleric proposed changes. He said that the animal domain is very subpar. It's hilarious to him to watching all the people just lose their minds over it. He basically says, you take the animal domain and 800 hit points, and he'll take the knowledge domain and plus 10 spell penetration and plus 3 to all spell DCs. And he bets news characters will perform better. And then he compares it to animal domain to unyielding sentinel. Great for hit points, not the best choice otherwise. He's got a good point there, but still, 800 hit points is a lot of hit points. So
I wouldn't mind it.
I'm not gonna poo-poo on 800 hit points. So, but there's definitely I think he's absolutely right. There's other great options. Even with 800 hit points, I would not be picking animal domain. I'm with him. The 10 spell penetration and plus 3 to spell DCs sounds tasty.
Yep.
Bradley wrote in about Intim tanks can help in Reaper if someone bounces aggro around it helps. He also says that everyone, echoing our advice earlier, everyone should carry wands or scrolls. UMD is not a dump skill. And Randy says that backpedaling in range attacks with improved precise shot or magic area effect spells if you can, but even stutter stepping backwards with a melee can reduce the number of hits you take. All great advice. And thanks to everyone who wrote in. There were a lot of great tips this week adding to the Reaper mode, so great advice for everyone. With that, we're going to close out the show here. Anything else you guys want to say before we head out?
Have a great afternoon, everybody, or evening, depending on when you listen to this.
Yeah, sure. All right, then we'll close out the show here. So thanks for everyone listening to the show, especially the folks in the chat room. A lot of great stuff in the chat room today. And thanks to all of the people that helped me make DDOCast happen, especially today. Thank you to Arkat and Benton for working with us through some technical difficulties so we get the show started a little bit late. We apologize for that, but and we had to adjust how we were going to record the show. So we apologize for any of the less than quality audio this week. But thanks to these guys for hanging in there and getting the show together today. Thanks also to Standing Stone Games and Wizards of the Coast for making DDO happen, and thanks to Cyberbears for hosting the podcast. If you'd like to support the show, you can visit our website, DDOCast.com, or you can support us on Patreon. You can hit us up at DDOCast.com for show notes, MP3s, our calendar, previous shows, swag, and other fun stuff. If you'd like to be part of the show, if you have a comment on this episode or a question you'd like to hear us answer, maybe a topic you'd like to hear us debate, then send us an email at ddocast@gmail.com or just leave us a comment. Our closing tip for the week comes from Francisco Antholanus. Play your role in the party, not the self-made man. A great tip for running Reaper mode especially. So until next time, may all your attack rolls be crits, all your chest level appropriate, have fun, and don't forget to gather for buffs.